8 years ago, Gundam and Breaker are probably the last two words I've ever wanted to hear or read in the same sentence. As someone who just started out in the Gunpla building scene, the idea of Gundam Breaker seems almost criminal. Would I develop a newfound love to breaking Gunpla, or would I find myself later in an even deeper rabbit hole? Fast forward to 2024, and here I am now, an avid fan of the Gundam Breaker series after having my first dab in its third installment back then. Over 500 hours of my life was fully taken away, and I wouldn't have wanted it any other way. But we'll get back to reminiscing another day. Gundam Breaker 4 is the fourth installment in the series, and yes, we will ignore the fact that new Gundam Breaker ever existed. And in many ways, Gundam Breaker 4 is essentially a reset button to the franchise where it goes back to its roots, while also trying out new things that have been implemented in more recent titles. It still carries the weight of the Gundam Physalis, but has the slick design and spank of the Hyakushiki. Although I will stop myself here before my train of thought goes into even darker territories. Right from the get-go, Gundam Breaker 4 delivers just what you'd expect from a proper sequel of the series. It brings the exhilarating and frantic hack-and-slash combat I've missed in Gundam Breaker 3, alongside its complete arsenal of guns and ballistic weaponry. But more than that, it brings a whole lot of its most notable mobile suits, totaling into just over 250 at its core. And just when you thought it was over, you have even greater customization options to make something completely out of this world, or maybe something to just question your sanity. Unlike the Gundam universes and its complicated storylines, Gundam Breaker 4's plot is as simple as it gets. It doesn't waste its time trying to overcomplicate itself, so I'll save you the same trouble as well. You, the self-inserted main protagonist, entered a beta test of the newly made game GB4. Here, you will end up meeting someone who will teach you how to play the game, but eventually, you and a few others that you'll meet along the way will form long-lasting bonds and maybe a clan as well. And hey, maybe you'll enter a battle tournament and have your shining moment to fight a big bad boss by the end of it all. Its story is pretty much bare bones and brief. Sliced in a couple of chapters with some minor dialogue and shenanigans, it doesn't try to overwhelm you with anything grand, but it also doesn't give you anything at all, really. For the most part, the story felt more like an afterthought to add more hours before the game's curtain drew to a close. And when it did, it just left me wondering, all confused and shocked. It's by no means a terrible end. And in fact, I actually felt more interested yet disgruntled that it only got my attention at the very end. Gundam Breaker 4's gameplay is something that could easily be described by its own title. It's an action RPG all about breaking mobile suits and Gundams. You can hack and slash your way through waves of enemies or mow them down with a vast array of long-range weaponry from beam rifles, bazookas, and even missile launchers. It's by far one of the most expansive and customizable the series has ever produced, and one that you should be eyeing for whether you're just starting out in the series or just someone that needs that extra boost of motivation to pick it up again. For starters, Gundam Breaker 4's gameplay is categorized as a mission-based RPG, where you're expected to take on missions from a central base. Unlike Gundam Breaker 3, the fourth installment would have you roaming around the base with your mobile suits instead of just your pilot avatars. It's a nice little upgrade as you move around and show off your customization prowess into the online lobbies that we'll talk about much later in the review. You have a handful of options while inside the central base. These range from a mission counter where you can take on missions from story, quest, to even bounty hunter, which is basically a mission to fight off player-made mobile suits, or survival, which you can unlock much later. You also have your NPC for buying builder parts to attach to your mobile suits, to even purchasing the actual mobile suit parts itself alongside their unique paint schematics. Other notable interactions in the hub will be your NPC to join or create clans, an online lobby search, or the leaderboards and rankings, aside from the huge hangar where you can display a life-sized mobile suit from your own creation or from other players. When it comes to the actual battles in Gundam Breaker 4, there's a whole lot of things that you'd need to take note of, but the tutorial right at the start of the game pretty much sums it up nicely. The game is basically built as a wave-based battle simulator that lets you fight hordes of enemy gunpla popping out of nowhere. Here, you can use your left hand and right hand melee weapons or your equipped long range weapons, which can also have one on each hand. However, some melee weapons can only be equipped using both, which removes the dual wielding aspect of the game. Aside from that, some builder or body parts also come with special skills like an X that can be used at the cost of some gauge that you can build up as you attack and kill enemies, or an op where it's balanced around a cooldown timer whenever it's used. You also have the main protagonist exclusive, which is the Awaken gauge that gets filled up, which increases your power, and where you can also equip and use a flashy finisher move for maximum style points. What's very interesting in here is the addition of boss-type battles where the previous installment had nothing more than just enemy gunplas with an absurd amount of health. This is somewhat similar to what new Gundam Breaker had, where you can fight perfect-grade gunplas and all sorts of unique suits. They're not exactly the most challenging fights though, but they're good enough to add a bit of depth and simply as a change of pace from time to time, even if their moves can be a bit repetitive with slam, dash, and beam attacks. Customization is also something that deserves its own section. For fans of the series, it's by no means an exaggeration that more than half the game is spent customizing and tweaking your gunpla rather than spending time actually fighting or advancing the story. Because if you're not fighting in style, are you really fighting at all? There's over 250 mobile suits across multiple universes in the franchise. You've got Gundam Seed and Gundam Seed Destiny, where I've started getting into the series to the more old-school Mobile Suit Gundam from 1979. But more than that, you also have tons of different grades and sizes from Super Deformed SD, High Grade, HG, and Master Grade MG. And each one of these pieces can be mixed and matched with little to no limitations. You're even allowed to rescale each individual piece to make something a bit more fitting, when some pieces appear much larger than others to keep it balanced rather than an awkward mess. The larger roster of usable parts also offers even more freedom to build away from the usual humanoid-type suits. Builder parts, on the other hand, does feel a bit stale in comparison. While there are still a lot of parts to add more flair to your creations, at this point in the series, I just felt like 8 individual parts doesn't particularly feel enough now. Please just let me have my 32 or even just 16 pieces of round spikes to complete my goth punk look. But we can't call this a true RPG game without its RPG elements. Each part also comes with its own unique set of substats that range from increased HP capacity, higher drop rates or quality, to the more offensive of increased attack power for your weapons, and maybe even slap in some thruster capacity for longer boost duration. These can be upgraded by leveling these stats when you merge parts with similar stats, just like how you do it on Gundam Breaker 3. But what's changed here is that a body part's rarity can now only be upgraded by using part evolution items instead of merging parts with a higher rarity. You also have other customization options such as cartridges that can be equipped within the 5 available slots, and this allows you to fine-tune your mobile suit to be played at your desired way. And once you're finished choosing and upgrading your parts, rescaled and repositioned everything to a T, and even assigned all your favorite skills and cartridges, you can now get into the nitty-gritty details of painting to fully coat your suit with your own unique brand of colors. Sky's the limit with this one, as you can choose a multitude of colors and a handful of textures and designs. You can even add, reposition, and resize decals to make something really unique with them. It's a fun little addition to the already exhausting part customizations. But unlike its customization, the world that Gundam Breaker 4 is set on doesn't particularly feel special. It's an obvious step down from what you'd see on SD Gundam Battle Alliance, where you can move around its larger spaces, while also having more interaction to its world with its destructible cityscapes and the like. Gundam Breaker 4 doesn't have any of that. You won't be seeing any visible destruction as you fight the hordes of enemies, nor do you have the freedom to escape its circular arena-type battlefield. However, it's still a pretty good-looking game. Mobile suits are well detailed in the Steam version of the game, and the overall experience is smooth with little to no frame drops or stuttering. But speaking of the overall experience and buttery smooth controls, it's something that takes a while to get used to. You can tweak your control schemes, reassign different keys to specific actions, and even have a handful of sliders for your sensitivity and such. There's also controller support if you really wanted it, but what really bothers me is the fact that some actions are just straight up awkward. Jumping and boosting around the map are tied to the same key with no way of assigning an alternative button to boost like the shift key, which feels a lot more natural. Meanwhile, item management does need better options. Sorting and filtering helps quite a bit, but when it comes to cartridges, which is basically the nightmare version of Monster Hunter Rise's pendants, then you're basically screwed as going through everything without any proper pinpointing or search function for specific skills becomes a huge issue as your inventory fills up. Gundam Breaker 4 is just straight up a fun game without the BS. It knows what it wants to do and just does it. If you're a fan of the series, you'll love it as much as you've loved the last game. But if you're a new player in the fray, just know that this is a game that heavily invests in its content with all things Gunpla more than creating a deep story that will leave you speechless. The frantic, action-oriented gameplay on top of hours upon hours of your time spent in its robust customization makes the game something that any fan would enjoy, especially with the addition of huge online lobbies with up to 24 players. So, if this is more up to your alley, then there's really no better time than now.
And for everything else gaming, choose Envision.
A community built by gamers.